And good evening to all of you. Welcome to our first official uh, one-sided recording. So normally it is difficult being on this side of the screen and not really seeing anybody, but this is going to be particularly difficult because now there's nobody on the other side. But let me get into tonight's recording and information session. So before I start, first of all, I hope you all had a good week, and I hope you've all managed to maybe do a bit of reading on philosophy of education. Just to really recap of what we discussed last week, we were saying that philosophy is about the love of knowledge. Education is about acquiring knowledge, so it would really make sense to study the philosophy of education if we are educators. So pretty much tonight, or with this recording, I am going to be looking at the three biggest names really in philosophy, I suppose, specifically classical Western philosophy. And I emphasize the word Western because we are very aware of the dominant Western culture in, I think, in all our human sciences, and philosophy has not escaped that. So where in the past, we would only focus on the Western philosophies. I'm really, it's great to be able to, within a module like this, to also give airtime and space to discuss other philosophies, and in particular, we're going to look at some African philosophies. Obviously, Ubuntu being the main one, but it's really encouraging and enriching for us, for me, I think, and I have to be honest here about myself, but for me to try and pull myself out of the dominant Western way of thinking, and to try and encourage my students, together with myself, to actually realize that there are other ways of approaching big life questions. So we will be looking at the three main father figures in Western classical philosophy: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And then just towards the end, I'm going to just do a quick brief rundown of the two main philosophies to which they belong, and that is idealism and realism. And before I actually get into tonight's topics, just to quickly run through your first ICE task instructions with you. I'm very aware of the fact that there are some of you who still do not have access to VC Learn. I'm just hoping you are able to access the YouTube recordings. But your first ICE task is due on the 3rd of April. And basically, really all it is you're going to go and look at two articles. The first article on page 6 and 7 of that particular article by Fendler is just kind of a rundown on how about composing philosophical essays. The second article contains 4 examples of philosophical essay writing, but it's only the introductory paragraph of each article. You do not have to focus on the 4th one. So look at the first 3 sample paragraphs, and then question 3 of the instruction, there are 6 criteria by which you need to analyze those samples. And once you've analyzed them, you select a sample paragraph that resonates most with you, or that you feel meets those 6 criteria. Then you're going to click on the thread or the ICE Task 1 label at the top above the red arrow of the instruction, and it'll take you to a discussion kind of like forum. You're going to select the sample paragraph that you feel resonates with you, and then you're literally just going to discuss how you think this sample paragraph actually meets the 6 criteria as stipulated in question 3. And that's it. And then once you've done that, you're going to just comment on one other student's posting within that same thread. So that is your ICE task. if I see here by the end of next week there are still too many students who do not have access to VC Learn, then I will really honestly consider extending the due date. But for now, I'm going to leave it as the 3rd of April. So there's still more than enough time actually to complete that task. All right, then let's get straight into tonight's learning unit 2. We're going to be looking at the first and the second theme. So we're going to look at Socrates first of all. And Socrates is really known as the founding father figure of modern Western philosophy. I like Socrates. His well-known saying is, the one thing I know is that I know nothing. And I love that about him. For him, knowledge is admitting that you're ignorant. And it's only when you admit that you're ignorant that you can become knowledgeable. And I really like that. He's very much into questioning. He's well known for his Socratic method, developing the Socratic method of questioning, which is really just about questioning your assumptions and your beliefs. So it's not about being obtuse or being disrespectful towards your students. It's really just about almost playing the devil's advocate. Like if they say XYZ, you reply with the but why X? Why not AYZ? And then they'll respond, and then you'll say, okay, you've responded to AYZ, but what about AYB? So you are just helping the student to unpack core beliefs and assumptions that they're not even aware of. And we all have these. We all have these core beliefs, these blind spots in our belief and thought processing that we just kind of ascribe to and live by, but we don't really unpack them. Where did this come from? And in my PhD, my topic was multicultural, diverse education in South Africa 15 years or 20 or 30 years into democratic South Africa, post-apartheid. Are we getting it right? And we're not. We're not, because many of us, first of all, are not aware of our cultural blind spots. And secondly, we're ignoring them. We're not openly unpacking them and admitting that we have them. And to me, it's only once we've done that that we can actually move on with fair cultural, multicultural, competent education in South Africa. That's just my opinion. That was what my PhD was on. So I did a lot of Socratic method questioning in my own life in order to actually put together my opinion and thoughts along multicultural education in South Africa. 30 years into post-apartheid, we are still not doing it right. So that's what I love about the Socratic method. He was very student centered. He was an idealist, and we'll get into the idealist philosophy in a moment. He believed in inductive reasoning, so looking at general patterns or focusing on certain patterns and then making general observation based on those patterns, very much a bottom-up kind of way of reasoning. His questioning was open-ended, so he didn't have an ulterior motive where he wanted to guide his students. He just wanted them to discover more about themselves. It was more about them and their self-knowledge as opposed to the external world around them. And he was actually a soldier in life, but he questioned everything, and he became very unpopular with the government of the day, so much so that he was sentenced to death by drinking poison, which he willfully did. He didn't even try and fight it. So I have a lot of respect for Socrates. He was a nonconformist. He believed that knowledge was rigid. There was fixed definition of concepts. He would, in a classroom with his students, he would just question them all the time so that they could uncover their own truth. It's basically, I think that's all I can say about Socrates. For him, education was all about learning to reason, and that once a student could reason, they were educated. This is really, for someone who lived that long ago, yeah, very, very clever. So that's Socrates in a nutshell. Moving on to Plato, who was a student of Socrates. Plato was also inductive, believed in inductive reasoning. His education, philosophy of education or epistemology was also very student orientated. He also fell into the idealistic realm of philosophy. He's well known for his dialectic reasoning, method of reasoning, very similar to the Socratic method, but the dialectic method reasoning was more of a debate. It wasn't one person spiraling down into to uncover their core beliefs and their incorrect assumptions. It was kind of a debate between opposing counter arguments. It could be an individual partaking in this debate with himself, but he used this more with having an argument or making a statement and then seeing how his students debated that, coming up with different arguments. And his whole idea of education then was, again, examining your assumptions as with Socrates, but then arriving at better assumptions by listening to opposing arguments and not just by spiraling down and questioning yourself. For Plato, he believed that your soul needs to undergo this dialectic reasoning process in order to even glimpse or understand the concept of true realities. He is very well known for his allegory of the cave. If you have not read that or read any write-up or explanation of it, I would strongly suggest that you do that, not only because you will more than likely be asked something to do with Plato's analogy of the cave in your assignments, but also just for yourself. It's a brilliant analogy of education. And he has put together this amazing analogy on so many levels, describing the human condition. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. Something that is still relevant, very much relevant today, and very prominent in a lot of literature and a lot of just even some of the classic movies are based on this philosophy or analogy of the cave. So for him, he believed everyone can learn, but they have to want to learn. They have to want to leave the cave. They have to want to be enlightened. It is an action of wanting to be more enlightened. In the classroom, there was a lot of, for him in the classroom, educating, a lot of reflection, a lot of evaluating your experiences. Again, the whole inductive way of thinking, recognizing patterns and then making general observations based on those patterns. Knowledge is about getting things right for the right reason. And his epistemology, that the development of ideas was just something, how can I say this? He believed that your ideas and concepts of reality are buried deep within your soul. And so that education is just the uncovering of that and the development of that. So that is Plato in a nutshell, another nutshell. What I like most about Plato, he must have been an incredibly intelligent man, and I would love to, I don't know, one day maybe we have the opportunity to have a discussion with him on just the way that he thinks is just, yeah, his mind, it must have been an incredible mind. Right, then let's move over to Aristotle. He was a student of Plato. Aristotle kind of moved on the other side of the continuum. Don't really want to put Socrates and Plato on a continuum with Aristotle, but in that era, and in terms of idealism versus realism, I suppose you can put them on either side of a continuum. Aristotle was a realist. He moved, or his life, his belief was in the realistic or the realism philosophy. He believed in the deductive way of reasoning. In other words, not bottom-up approach of observation and making a general conclusion, but he was more on the top-down approach. In other words, you have a hypothesis, you have something you want to prove, and you do that by collecting data empirically with scientific methods. You then either disprove or prove your hypothesis. So totally teacher-centered way of educating. He is known for this golden mean of moral behavior, which really means that we should strive to making decisions or doing things in the middle of the two extremes. In other words, we don't do something or behave in a way excessively or deficiently, but we follow the middle way, and that's how we become virtuous and morally good. So yeah, it's not a good or bad. You find the middle way, and that is how he believed we should be educating students on being virtuous. He believed that everything we do is philosophically based, even if we don't believe in philosophy. The fact that we engage in a conversation about not believing in philosophy is already philosophy. So yeah, he for him, God created humans with the intellect solely for contemplating the universe. Although the contemplation part is thought-based, he put that into practice. He wanted people must experience things with their senses in order to gain the knowledge. So it's not about your ideas and your mind, but it's about experiencing things through your senses. Okay, that is Aristotle. He there's truth in the world around you. Sorry, I'm just making 100% sure I've covered everything on the slide. Okay, then moving then on to idealism versus realism. Touched on a little bit of both through discussing these three classical philosophers, but if we were to look at them just a little bit more in depth or one at a time, the idealistic educator or idealism, ideas exist, reality exists in the ideas that are in your mind, in your thoughts. So the focus is completely on your mind, on your thoughts. The focus is on rote learning. Your ideas in your mind leads to new ideas. This happens through the questioning of between you and yourself or between you and somebody else, and that is how you gain new knowledge. The teacher in the philosophy of idealism operating within that philosophy would be merely a facilitator in the classroom, guiding the students to discovering their knowledge, discovering things about themselves. They do this through logic and reasoning. And the only true reality really is within your mind. The material world is simply temporary. So it's the whole thing of if a tree falls in Peru, it doesn't make a sound because you haven't experienced it. And that is the idealistic kind of like way of seeing the world. There's in education, it's focused on rote learning. You attain full knowledge of yourself. It's about self-realization, cultivating truth and looking at spiritual values. And I think if we really think about our education today in our content-based, assessment-driven curriculum education, there isn't much space for idealism, actually. And I think that is quite sad. And I think that maybe as lecturers, we could give some airtime to this kind of way of teaching. I know that our curriculum doesn't allow this or give much allowance for this, but we could use the hidden curriculum. We could use those moments in between the curriculum to convey this kind of philosophy to our students so that they can unpack dominant assumptions and get to know themselves better, get to understand why they behave the way they behave, because it's core beliefs um, that 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 exist, and maybe those core beliefs are not right or not correct. And I think in our multicultural education, as I said in the beginning, I think a lot of our core beliefs need to be challenged, and we need to give our students that space to unpack those, to discover them first of all, and then to unpack them. And I think, those of us who are lecturing teachers, I think even more so, this is a crucial skill that we need to teach our students, but not just teachers, anyone. It doesn't matter what field or what career field you're in, but that you're able to reflect critically on why you do things the way you do them. And that maybe there are certain core beliefs and assumptions that you need to be challenging and that you need to unpack and change. So yeah, I think there's definitely place for idealism in our classrooms today. Obviously, the disadvantage then, we couldn't follow an idealistic kind of philosophy all the time because it does tend to be quite vague. It does tend to be too reflective, too much focus on mental activity. And I think this could lead that your students become maybe too intellectual about things as opposed to, yeah, just embracing and confronting the real world issues. But that's idealism in a nutshell. I think, in my opinion, we need to add a bit of that into our lecture rooms, but we can discuss that at our next collab next week. It's going to be one of our discussion points is practically implementing idealism versus realism and what is the good and what is the bad in both. Right, then let's go on to realism. Realism is exactly what it says. It's very realistic. It's very hands-on. It uses deductive logic as proposed by Aristotle. Very scientific. Um, it's not only when you perceive something as real that it's real. Reality exists outside of your perception as well. Um, Emphasis in the philosophy of realism in the classroom would be on practically discovering knowledge. Your students, your aim would be to develop functional citizens um, who would be successful, who would progress, achieve, who would have the relevant knowledge in order to do that. Your teaching style would be very investigative, discovering, um, as I said, hands-on, practical. What exists must be explored and learned. And the focus is definitely a lot on the body and our senses, as opposed to the idealist whose focus is on the mind. The disadvantage of operating permanently in the realism philosophy is that you do lose contact with external values. Sorry, not external, eternal values. Um, and I think that could lead to moral decay. And if we really think if we think about education in South Africa at the moment, that is very assessment based, very content driven, that we would be, I think we would have to be honest and say that we've kind of lost touch with moral education. And with that, I'm not saying necessarily attached or linked to any form of religion, but just moral education. What is it to be a morally sound, globally functional citizen, as opposed to someone who has content knowledge and who has got a good grade on an assessment. What does that actually mean? Are we sending people into the real world with a morally or a good moral designed compass, who can, I don't know, rationalize things for themselves and not just these uncritically thinking people? I don't know. I think we're moving in that direction, definitely, but I do think we still have a lot of change and development to make. And I unfortunately, the people designing our curriculum are not on the same page. But I think we as educators, we could definitely be a little bit more creative with our delivery so that we do include philosophies of idealism and the more, I don't know, the more creative, holistic side of developing our students. That yes, it is about content knowledge, it is about passing that exam, because unfortunately that is the only way they can move on to the next level. But let's not do that to the detriment of the rest of the student. So before I start philosophizing too much here myself, let me stop talking to you. That's pretty much in a nutshell the first two themes of Learning Unit 2. Next week with the collab, I would like to us to look at the realities of teaching within those two philosophies, what it means. And if you could maybe in the meantime read up a bit about them and maybe just come up with real life examples of what has happened in your lecture rooms. And if you're not lecturing yet, maybe you can think of a moment or a time when you were a student and where you can actually recognize the philosophy of idealism or realism within a lecture. So we will be discussing that in a little bit more detail. We look at the pros and the cons of both within education. And then, as I said again, your ICE task, which is due for the 3rd of April, if you can work on that. And then please let me know if there's anything that I can help you with. Just email me and I will definitely get back to you with whatever help you need. And I think that is this recording done. I wish you a good week, good weekend, and I know that you're under a lot of pressure, academic pressure, and all of you obviously working as well. But if you just take 10 or 15 minutes every day just to read up a bit of these two philosophies so that we can all engage in the conversation next week. Have a good week. Thank you all for listening to this recording, and I will chat to you all again next week with a little bit more live interaction on the other side. Have a good weekend. Cheers.